Brought to you by WikiVidi documentaries. Spain. Spain, officially the Kingdom of Spain, is a sovereign state located on the Iberian Peninsula in southwestern Europe, with two large archipelagos, the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean Sea, and the Canary Islands off the North African Atlantic coast, two cities, Ceuta and Melilla, in the North African mainland, and several small islands in the Alboran Sea near the Moroccan coast. The country's mainland is bordered to the south and east by the Mediterranean Sea except for a small land boundary with Gibraltar, to the north and northeast by France, Andorra, and the Bay of Biscay, and to the west and northwest by Portugal and the Atlantic Ocean. It is the only European country to have a border with an African country, and its African territory accounts for nearly 5% of its population, mostly in the Canary Islands, but also in Ceuta and Melilla. With an area of, Spain is the largest country in southern Europe, the second largest country in Western Europe and the European Union, and the fourth largest country in the European continent. By population, Spain is the sixth largest in Europe and the fifth in the European Union. Spain's capital and largest city is Madrid. Other major urban areas include Barcelona, Valencia, Seville, Bilbao, and Malaga. Modern humans first arrived in the Iberian Peninsula around 35,000 years ago. Iberian cultures along with ancient Phoenician, Greek, and Carthaginian settlements developed on the peninsula until it came under Roman rule around 200 BCE, after which the region was named Hispania, based on the earlier Phoenician name Span, or Spania. In the Middle Ages, the area was conquered by Germanic tribes and later by the Moors. Spain emerged as a unified country in the 15th century, following the marriage of the Catholic monarchs and the completion of the 8 centuries-long Reconquest, or Reconquista, from the Moors in 1492. In the early modern period, Spain became one of history's first global colonial empires, leaving a vast cultural and linguistic legacy that includes over 500 million Spanish speakers, making Spanish the world's second most spoken first language, after Mandarin Chinese. Spain is a democracy organized in the form of a parliamentary government under a constitutional monarchy. It is a middle power and a major developed country, with the world's 14th largest economy by nominal GDP and 16th largest by purchasing power parity. It is a member of the United Nations, the European Union, the Eurozone, the Council of Europe, the Organization of Ibero-American States, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the World Trade Organization, and many other international organizations. Etymology. The origins of the Roman name Hispania, from which the modern name España was derived, are uncertain due to inadequate evidence, although it is documented that the Phoenicians and Carthaginians referred to the region as Spania. Therefore, the most widely accepted etymology is a Semitic Phoenician one. Down the centuries there have been a number of accounts and hypotheses. The Renaissance scholar Antonio de Nobria proposed that the word Hispania evolved from the Iberian word Hispales, meaning city of the Western world. Jesus Luis Conchillos argues that the root of the term span is the Phoenician word spy, meaning to forge metals. Therefore, Hispania would mean the land where metals are forged. It may be a derivation of the Phoenician Ishania, meaning island of rabbits, land of rabbits, or the edge, a reference to Spain's location at the end of the Mediterranean. Roman coins struck in the region from the reign of Hadrian show a female figure with a rabbit at her feet, and Strabo called it land of the rabbits. Hispania may derive from the poetic use of the term Hesperia, reflecting the Greek perception of Italy as a western land or land of the setting sun, and Spain being still further west as Hesperia Ultima. There is the claim that Hispania derives from the Basque word ez pana, meaning edge or border, another reference to the fact that the Iberian Peninsula constitutes the southwest corner of the European continent. Two 15th-century Spanish Jewish scholars, Don Isaac Abravanel and Solomon ibn Verga, gave an explanation now considered folkloric. Both men wrote in two different published works that the first Jews to reach Spain were brought by ship by Pharos, who was confederate with the king of Babylon when he laid siege to Jerusalem. This man was a Grecian by birth, but who had been given a kingdom in Spain. He became related by marriage to Esban, the nephew of King Heracles, who also ruled over a kingdom in Spain. Heracles later renounced his throne in preference for his native Greece, leaving his kingdom to his nephew, Esban, from whom the country of Espania took its name. Based upon their testimonies, this eponym would have already been in use in Spain by c. 350 BCE. History. Iberia enters written records as a land populated largely by the Iberians, Basques and Celts. Early on, its coastal areas were settled by Phoenicians, who founded Western Europe's most ancient cities, Cadiz and Malaga. Phoenician influence expanded as much of the peninsula was eventually incorporated into the Carthaginian Empire, becoming a major theatre of the Punic Wars against the expanding Roman Empire. After an arduous conquest, the peninsula came fully under Roman rule. During the early Middle Ages it came under Germanic rule, but later, much of it was conquered by Moorish invaders from North Africa. In a process that took centuries, the small Christian kingdoms in the north gradually regained control of the peninsula. The last Moorish kingdom fell in the same year Columbus reached the Americas. A global empire began which saw Spain become the strongest kingdom in Europe, the leading world power for a century and a half, and the largest overseas empire for 3 centuries. Continued wars and other problems eventually led to a diminished status. The Napoleonic invasions of Spain led to chaos, triggering independence movements that tore apart most of the empire and left the country politically unstable. Prior to the Second World War, Spain suffered a devastating civil war and came under the rule of an authoritarian government, which oversaw a period of stagnation that was followed by a surge in the growth of the economy. Eventually democracy was peacefully restored in the form of a parliamentary constitutional monarchy. Spain joined the European Union, experiencing a cultural renaissance and steady economic growth until the beginning of the 21st century. That started a new globalized world with economic and ecological challenges. Prehistory and pre-Roman peoples. Archaeological research at Atapuerca indicates the Iberian Peninsula was populated by hominids 1.2 million years ago. In Atapuerca, fossils have been found of the earliest known hominins in Europe, the Homo antecessor. Modern humans first arrived in Iberia, from the north on foot, about 35,000 years ago. The best-known artifacts of these prehistoric human settlements are the famous paintings in the Altamira cave of Cantabria in northern Iberia, which were created from 35,600 to 13,500 BCE by Cro-Magnon. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that the Iberian Peninsula acted as one of several major refugia, from which northern Europe was repopulated following the end of the last ice age. The largest groups inhabiting the Iberian Peninsula before the Roman conquest were the Iberians and the Celts. The Iberians inhabited the Mediterranean side of the peninsula, from the northeast to the southeast. The Celts inhabited much of the inner and Atlantic sides of the peninsula, from the northwest to the southwest. Basques occupied the western area of the Pyrenees mountain range and adjacent areas. The Phoenician-influenced Tartessians culture flourished in the southwest, and the Lusitanians and Vetans occupied areas in the central west. A number of cities were founded along the coast by Phoenicians, and trading outposts were established by Greeks in the northeast. Eventually, Phoenician Carthaginians expanded inland, conquering about over half of modern-day Spain. Roman Empire and the Gothic Kingdom. During the Second Punic War, roughly between 210 and 205 BC, the expanding Roman Republic captured Carthaginian trading colonies along the Mediterranean coast. Although it took the Romans nearly 2 centuries to complete the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, they retained control of it for over 6 centuries. Roman rule was bound together by law, language, and the Roman road. The cultures of the Celtic and Iberian populations were gradually Romanized, at different rates depending on what part of Hispania they lived in, with local leaders being admitted into the Roman aristocratic class. Hispania served as a granary for the Roman market, and its harbors exported gold, wool, olive oil, and wine. Agricultural production increased with the introduction of irrigation projects, some of which remain in use. Emperors Hadrian, Trajan, Theodosius I, and the philosopher Seneca were born in Hispania. Christianity was introduced into Hispania in the 1st century AD, and it became popular in the cities in the 2nd century AD. Most of Spain's present languages and religion, and the basis of its laws, originate from this period. The weakening of the Western Roman Empire's jurisdiction in Hispania began in 409, when the Germanic Suebian Vandals, together with the Sarmatian Alans, entered the peninsula at the invitation of a Roman usurper. These tribes, who had crossed the Rhine in early 407 and ravaged Gaul, the Suebi established a kingdom in what is today modern Galicia and northern Portugal, whereas the Vandals established themselves in southern Spain by 420 before crossing over to North Africa in 429 and taking Carthage in 439. As the Western Empire disintegrated, the social and economic base became greatly simplified. But even in modified form, the successor regimes maintained many of the institutions and laws of the late empire, including Christianity and assimilation to the evolving Roman culture. The Byzantines established an occidental province, Spania, in the south, with the intention of reviving Roman rule throughout Iberia. Eventually, however, Hispania was reunited under Visigothic rule. Isidore of Seville, born in Murcia, Archbishop of Seville, was an influential cleric and philosopher, and was much studied in the Middle Ages in Europe. His theories were also vital to the conversion of the Visigothic kingdom from an Arian domain to a Catholic one in the councils of Toledo. This Gothic kingdom was the first independent Christian kingdom ruling in the Iberian Peninsula, and in the Reconquista it was the referent for the different kingdoms fighting against the Muslim rule. Middle Ages, Muslim era and Reconquista. In the 8th century, nearly all of the Iberian Peninsula was conquered by largely Moorish Muslim armies from North Africa. These conquests were part of the expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate. Only a small area in the mountainous northwest of the peninsula managed to resist the initial invasion. Under Islamic law, Christians and Jews were given the subordinate status of dhimmi. This status permitted Christians and Jews to practice the religions as people of the book, but they were required to pay a special tax and had legal and social rights inferior to those of Muslims. Conversion to Islam proceeded at an increasing pace. The Mullahs are believed to have comprised the majority of the population of Al-Andalus by the end of the 10th century. The Muslim community in the Iberian Peninsula was itself diverse and beset by social tensions. The Berber people of North Africa, who had provided the bulk of the invading armies, clashed with the Arab leadership from the Middle East. Over time, large Moorish populations became established, especially in the Guadalquivir River Valley, the coastal plain of Valencia, the Ebro River Valley, and in the mountainous region of Granada. Córdoba, the capital of the Caliphate since Abd ar-Rahman III, was the largest, richest, and most sophisticated city in Western Europe. Mediterranean trade and cultural exchange flourished. Muslims imported a rich intellectual tradition from the Middle East and North Africa. Muslim and Jewish scholars played an important part in reviving and expanding classical Greek learning in Western Europe. Some important philosophers at the time were Averroes, Ibn Arabi and Maimonides. The Romanized cultures of the Iberian Peninsula interacted with Muslim and Jewish cultures in complex ways, giving the region a distinctive culture. Outside the cities, where the vast majority lived, the land ownership system from Roman times remained largely intact, as Muslim leaders rarely dispossessed landowners, and the introduction of new crops and techniques led to an expansion of agriculture. In the 11th century, the Muslim holdings fractured into rival Taifa kingdoms, allowing the small Christian states the opportunity to greatly enlarge their territories. The arrival from North Africa of the Islamic ruling sects of the Almoravids and the Almohads restored unity upon the Muslim holdings, with a stricter, less tolerant application of Islam, and saw a revival in Muslim fortunes. This reunited Islamic state experienced more than a century of successes that partially reversed Christian gains. The Reconquista was the centuries-long period in which Christian rule was re-established over the Iberian Peninsula. The Reconquista is viewed as beginning with the Battle of Covadonga won by Don Pelayo in 722 and was concurrent with the period of Muslim rule on the Iberian Peninsula. The Christian army's victory over Muslim forces led to the creation of the Christian kingdom of Asturias along the northwestern coastal mountains. Shortly after, in 739, Muslim forces were driven from Galicia, which was to eventually host one of medieval Europe's holiest sites, Santiago de Compostela, and was incorporated into the new Christian kingdom. The Kingdom of Leon was the strongest Christian kingdom for centuries. In 1188, the first modern parliamentary session in Europe was held in Leon. The Kingdom of Castile, formed from Leonese territory, was its successor as strongest kingdom. The kings and the nobility fought for power and influence in this period. The example of the Roman emperors influenced the political objective of the crown. While the nobles benefited from feudalism, Muslim armies had also moved north of the Pyrenees, but they were defeated by Frankish forces at the Battle of Poitiers, Francia, and pushed out of the Vert's southernmost region of France along the seacoast by the 760s. Later, Frankish forces established Christian counties on the southern side of the Pyrenees. These areas were to grow into the kingdoms of Navarre and Aragon. For several centuries, the fluctuating frontier between the Muslim and Christian-controlled areas of Iberia was along the Ebro and Douro valleys. The county of Barcelona and the Kingdom of Aragon entered in a dynastic union. and gained territory and power in the Mediterranean. In 1229 Majorca was conquered. So was Valencia in 1238. The breakup of Al-Andalus into the competing Taifa kingdoms helped the long-embattled Iberian Christian kingdoms gain the initiative. The capture of the strategically central city of Toledo in 1085 marked a significant shift in the balance of power in favor of the Christian kingdoms. Following a great Muslim resurgence in the 12th century, the great Moorish strongholds in the south fell to Christian Spain in the 13th century, Córdoba in 1236 and Seville in 1248. In the 13th and 14th centuries, the Marinid dynasty of Morocco invaded and established some enclaves on the southern coast but failed in their attempt to re-establish North African rule in Iberia and were soon driven out. After 800 years of Muslim presence in Spain, the last Nasrid Sultanate of Granada, a tributary state, would finally surrender in 1492 to the Catholic monarchs Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon. From the mid-13th century, literature and philosophy started to flourish again in the Christian peninsular kingdoms, based on Roman and Gothic traditions. An important philosopher from this time is Ramon Lull. Abraham Cresques was a prominent Jewish cartographer. Roman law and its institutions were the model for the legislators. The King Alfonso X of Castile focused on strengthening this Roman and Gothic past, and also on linking the Iberian Christian kingdoms with the rest of medieval European Christendom. He worked for being elected Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and published the Siete Partidas Code. The Toledo School of Translators is the name that commonly describes the group of scholars who worked together in the city of Toledo during the 12th and 13th centuries to translate many of the philosophical and scientific works from Classical Arabic, Ancient Greek, and Ancient Hebrew. The Islamic transmission of the classics is the main Islamic contributions to medieval Europe. The Castilian language, more commonly known as Spanish, after becoming the national language and lingua franca of Spain, evolved from Vulgar Latin, as did other Romance languages of Spain like the Catalan, Asturian and Galician languages, as well as other Romance languages in Latin Europe. Basque, the only non-Romance language in Spain, continued evolving from early Basque to medieval. The glosses Emilianenses founded in the monasteries of San Millán de la Cogolla contain the first written words in both Basque and Spanish. Having the first become an influence in the formation of the second is an evolution of Latin. The 13th century also witnessed the crown of Aragon, centered in Spain's northeast, expand its reach across islands in the Mediterranean, to Sicily and even Athens. Around this time the universities of Palencia and Salamanca were established. The Black Death of 1348 and 1349 devastated Spain. Imperial Spain. In 1469, the crowns of the Christian kingdoms of Castile and Aragon were united by the marriage of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. 1478 commenced the completion of the conquest of the Canary Islands, and in 1492, the combined forces of Castile and Aragon captured the Emirate of Granada from its last ruler Muhammad XII, ending the last remnant of a 781-year presence of Islamic rule in Iberia. That same year, Spain's Jews were ordered to convert to Catholicism or face expulsion from Spanish territories. During the Spanish Inquisition, the Treaty of Granada guaranteed religious tolerance towards Muslims. For a few years before Islam was outlawed in 1502 in the Kingdom of Castile, and 1527 in the Kingdom of Aragon, leading to Spain's Muslim population becoming nominally Christian Moriscos. A few decades after the Morisco Rebellion of Granada, known as the War of the Alpujarras, a significant proportion of Spain's formerly Muslim population was expelled, settling primarily in North Africa. The year 1492 also marked the arrival of Christopher Columbus in Indiana, the New World. During a voyage funded by Isabella, Columbus first voyaged across the Atlantic and reached the Caribbean islands, beginning the European exploration and conquest of the Americas, although he remained convinced that he had reached the Orient. The colonization of the Americas started, with conquistadors like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro. Miscegenation was the rule between the native and the Spanish cultures and people. As Renaissance new monarchs, Isabella and Ferdinand centralized royal power at the expense of local nobility, and the word España, whose root is the ancient name Hispania, began to be commonly used to designate the whole of the two kingdoms. With the wide-ranging political, legal, religious and military reforms, Spain emerged as the first world power. The unification of the crowns of Aragon and Castile by the marriage of their sovereigns laid the basis for modern Spain and the Spanish Empire. Although each kingdom of Spain remained a separate country, in social, political, laws, currency, and language, there were two big revolts against the new Habsburg monarch and the more authoritarian and imperial-style crown: revolt of the Comuneros in Castile, and revolt of the Brotherhoods in Majorca and Valencia. After years of combat, Comuneros Juan López de Padilla, Juan Bravo and Francisco Maldonado were executed, and Maria Pacheco went into exile. Germana de Foy also finished with the revolt in the Mediterranean. Spain was Europe's leading power throughout the 16th century and most of the 17th century, a position reinforced by trade and wealth from colonial possessions, and became the world's leading maritime power. It reached its apogee during the reigns of the first two Spanish Habsburgs, Charles I and Philip II. This period saw the Italian Wars, the revolt of the Comuneros, the Dutch Revolt, the Morisco Revolt, clashes with the Ottomans, the Anglo-Spanish War and wars with France. Through exploration and conquest, a royal marriage, alliances and inheritance, the Spanish Empire expanded to include vast areas in the Americas, islands in the Asia-Pacific area, areas of Italy, cities in northern Africa, as well as parts of what are now France, Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The first circumnavigation of the world was carried out in 1519 to 1521. It was the first empire on which it was said that the sun never set. This was an age of discovery, with daring explorations by sea and by land, the opening up of new trade routes across oceans, conquests and the beginnings of European colonialism. Spanish explorers brought back precious metals, spices, luxuries, and previously unknown plants, and played a leading part in transforming the European understanding of the globe. The cultural efflorescence witnessed during this period is now referred to as the Spanish Golden Age. The expansion of the empire caused immense upheaval in the Americas as the collapse of societies and empires and new diseases from Europe devastated American indigenous populations. The rise of humanism, the Counter-Reformation and new geographical discoveries and conquests raised issues that were addressed by the intellectual movement now known as the School of Salamanca, which developed the first modern theories of what are now known as international law and human rights. In the late 16th century and first half of the 17th century, Spain was confronted by unrelenting challenges from all sides. Barbary pirates, under the aegis of the rapidly growing Ottoman Empire, disrupted life in many coastal areas through their slave raids. and the renewed threat of an Islamic invasion. This was at a time when Spain was often at war with France. The Protestant Reformation dragged the kingdom ever more deeply into the mire of religiously charged wars. The result was a country forced into ever-expanding military efforts across Europe and in the Mediterranean. By the middle decades of a war and plague-ridden 17th-century Europe, the Spanish Habsburgs had enmeshed the country in continent-wide religious political conflicts. These conflicts drained it of resources and undermined the economy generally. Spain managed to hold on to most of the scattered Habsburg Empire, and help the imperial forces of the Holy Roman Empire reverse a large part of the advances made by Protestant forces, but it was finally forced to recognize the separation of Portugal and the Netherlands, and eventually suffered some serious military reverses to France in the latter stages of the immensely destructive, Europe-wide 30 Years' War. In the latter half of the 17th century, Spain went into a gradual decline, during which it surrendered several small territories to France and the Netherlands. However, it maintained and enlarged its vast overseas empire, which remained intact until the beginning of the 19th century. The decline culminated in a controversy over succession to the throne which consumed the first years of the 18th century. The War of the Spanish Succession was a wide-ranging international conflict combined with a civil war, and was to cost the kingdom its European possessions and its position as one of the leading powers on the continent. During this war, a new dynasty originating in France, the Bourbons, was installed. Long united only by the crown, a true Spanish state was established when the first Bourbon king, Philip V, united the crowns of Castile and Aragon into a single state, abolishing many of the old regional privileges and laws. The 18th century saw a gradual recovery and an increase in prosperity through much of the empire. The new Bourbon monarchy drew on the French system of modernizing the administration and the economy. Enlightenment ideas began to gain ground among some of the kingdom's elite and monarchy. Military assistance for the rebellious British colonies in the American War of Independence improved the kingdom's international standing. Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.